I had been saving for months to finally take a break from work, and in the summer of 2014, I booked myself a week off to drive up north. I was 26 then, living alone in a small apartment in Dallas, and I wanted a change of pace from the routine of work, traffic, and noise. I decided to drive out to a quiet lake in Arkansas, a place I had only read about online. It wasn't a popular tourist spot, which was exactly what I wanted: peace and space away from people. The lake was about a 5-hour drive from my place. I left early in the morning and drove through long stretches of empty highways, small towns with quiet gas stations, and then finally the winding roads surrounded by thick woods. It was late June, hot and humid, with the air heavy and still. By the time I reached the entrance to the state park area, it was already early afternoon. The ranger booth was unmanned, and a wooden sign at the side of the dirt road read, "Camping area, 3 miles." I followed the narrow road, bouncing over potholes until I reached the clearing. The campground was basic, just a couple of fire pits, picnic tables, and flat dirt patches for tents. I only saw one other vehicle, an old silver pickup parked near the tree line. The bed of the truck was empty except for a blue tarp. No one was around. I figured maybe the owner was fishing down by the water. I set up my tent near the edge of the lake, where I had a clear view of the water through the trees. The lake itself was wide and still, the surface like a sheet of dark glass. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. As I hammered the stakes into the ground, I noticed a crow perched on a branch above me, watching. It cawed once, sharp and loud, and then flew off deeper into the trees. The first day was uneventful. I unpacked, lit a small fire, cooked some canned food, and spent most of the afternoon sitting by the shore. The silence was what struck me the most. Back in the city, there was always the sound of engines, sirens, or voices. Here, the only noise was the wind moving through leaves or the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped quickly. The other truck was still parked near the trees, but I hadn't seen anyone all day. I assumed maybe they had hiked deeper into the woods or even left their vehicle while fishing somewhere else. I told myself not to think too much about it. That night, I lay in my tent listening to the forest sounds. Crickets buzzed, frogs croaked near the water, but sometime past midnight I woke up. I wasn't sure why. My eyes opened to darkness, and I could hear nothing. No insects, no frogs, just silence. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. I stayed still, listening. Then I heard it, a slow crunch of footsteps on leaves. They were close, moving around my tent. My first thought was an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, but the steps were too steady, too careful. I held my breath. The steps circled the tent once, then stopped. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I wanted to unzip the flap and look, but fear rooted me in place. After maybe a minute, the sound moved away, fading into the trees. I barely slept the rest of the night. At first light, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Nothing seemed disturbed, no footprints I could clearly see in the dirt, though the ground was hard and dry. The silver pickup was still there, but I saw no person. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself maybe it really was just an animal. The second day, I went on a short hike. The trail was narrow, and in some places, roots and fallen branches blocked the way. I carried a small backpack with water and a snack. About 2 miles in, I found a clearing with some broken beer bottles and old firewood stacked up, signs that people had been there before. But what made me pause was the smell. It was faint but distinct, like something rotting. I didn't see any dead animal, but the odor hung in the air. It made me turn back toward camp earlier than planned. When I returned, I noticed something that froze me. My cooler, which I had left closed by the tent, was unlatched and slightly open. Nothing inside was missing, but it was clear someone had lifted the lid. Animals might have done it, but the latch was tight, not the kind you could open easily without hands. That night, I built a larger fire and sat close to it, trying to reassure myself. The flames flickered high, throwing long shadows on the trees. I ate quickly, then sat with my flashlight across my lap. Hours passed, and fatigue pulled at me. I crawled into the tent, but I kept the flashlight in my hand. Sometime deep in the night, I woke again. The fire outside had burned down to glowing embers, and the air inside the tent was stuffy. Then I heard it, the same sound as before. Footsteps, this time slower, closer, crunching carefully around the tent. My body locked with fear. I held the flashlight tight but didn't turn it on, afraid the beam would reveal me awake. The sound stopped right outside the flap of my tent. For several seconds, there was no movement. Then I heard the faintest sound, like fabric brushing, as if a hand touched the nylon of the tent. My mouth went dry. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, the sound drifted away again, the steps moving back toward the trees. Morning came gray and damp. My nerves were shot. I decided I would pack up and leave. But when I walked over to my car, I stopped cold. On the driver's side window, faint but clear, was a handprint. Smudged, greasy, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass during the night. I knew for certain then it wasn't an animal. I didn't waste time. I broke down the tent in minutes, tossing things into the trunk without order. My hands shook as I worked, glancing over my shoulder again and again. The silver pickup was still there, unmoved, but I never saw anyone step out of it. It felt like eyes were on me from the trees the entire time. When I finally started the engine and pulled onto the dirt road, I kept checking my mirrors. The forest pressed close on both sides, dark and endless. After several miles, I reached the main road and only then let out the breath I'd been holding. I drove the entire 5 hours back without stopping, not even for gas until the tank was nearly empty. My body was running on pure adrenaline. By the time I made it back to Dallas, the sun was already setting again. In the days after, I kept replaying everything in my head. The footsteps, the cooler, the handprint. I wondered if someone had been living out there, watching the campground, waiting for people who came alone. The silver pickup haunted me the most. Always there, but no sign of its owner. I never went back to that lake. I never camped alone again. Even now, years later, when I think about it, I can still hear the sound of leaves crunching softly in the dark, circling where I slept. I had always wanted to see the Amazon with my own eyes, not through documentaries or photos, but to actually stand in it, breathe in the heavy air, and feel the ground beneath me. In 2014, when I was 29, I finally had the chance. A friend of mine had once worked in Brazil, and through him I learned about a small company that arranged guided treks into the rainforest. I didn't want a group trip though. I wanted to be alone to test myself. After some research, I figured out a way to arrange gear, food, and basic directions with a local contact in Manaus. It wasn't the safest plan, but the idea of camping alone in the Amazon pulled at me. The heat hit me immediately when I stepped into the jungle. It was different from any heat I had known before, thick, wet, and constant, like standing in a steam room that had no off switch. Every part of me was sweating within minutes, and every sound around me felt sharp. The noise never stopped. Birds, insects, things moving through leaves I couldn't see. The air smelled of mud, rotting plants, and something sweet but sour at the same time. I kept walking, stopping often to wipe my face, my backpack digging into my shoulders. By late afternoon, I had found a small patch of ground near a stream. It wasn't perfect. The earth was soft and damp, but it was flat, and I needed a place to rest. I set up my small tent, checked the straps, and laid out my sleeping bag inside. The ground felt uneven under me, but it would have to do. I boiled some water with my small stove, dropped in noodles, and ate them quickly while brushing ants off my legs. By the time the sun went down, the forest turned almost black. I zipped myself into the tent, telling myself I'd get used to the sounds. The first night was the hardest. The darkness felt different, like it was pressing in from every direction. I lay awake listening. Something moved near the stream, splashing lightly. Branches cracked in the distance. Insects buzzed right outside the thin tent walls. The heat never left, and I woke up every hour soaked in sweat, peeling my shirt off only to put it back on when the mosquitoes found me. In the morning, I stepped out to find fresh prints in the mud by the water. They were from something heavy, maybe a tapir or a wild pig. Couldn't be sure. The mud was churned, like whatever it was had been lingering. I tried not to think about it and filled my bottle with water after boiling it again. The second day, I tried to explore further down the stream, pushing through brush with my machete. Vines hung everywhere, some so thick they felt like ropes, others so thin they stuck to my skin like threads. Every step was slow. I stumbled over roots, slipped on mud, and swatted at clouds of mosquitoes. I found a wider section of the stream where the water was deeper, and I washed my face. Something moved under the surface, a flash of scales, and I stepped back quickly. I kept reminding myself I wasn't here for comfort. I was here to see what it felt like to be in this place, to know it for real. That night, I cooked rice and dried meat, trying to ignore the crawling feeling on my back. I checked the tent 3 times for holes. When I lay down, I noticed a faint light flashing outside. Fireflies drifting slowly through the air. I wanted to enjoy it, but my body stayed tense. On the 3rd day, I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't the usual bird call or insect hum. It was low, steady, like breathing but deeper. I sat up fast, heart racing, listening. The sound stopped. I waited for several minutes, gripping the machete in my hand, but it didn't return. When I finally stepped out of the tent, I saw the same mud near the stream had new tracks. These were bigger than before, rounder, wider. I didn't want to guess what made them, but they weren't human. That day, I stayed closer to camp. I gathered wood, checked my gear, and sharpened the machete. I felt watched. Every time I looked up, I thought I saw movement, just leaves shifting, but always too quick, too sudden. My clothes were stiff with sweat and dirt, and my skin itched from bites. By the 4th night, I barely slept at all. I kept hearing the sound again, that low noise, somewhere out in the trees. Once it came closer. My whole body froze. I held my breath and pressed the machete across my chest. The sound of something heavy moving over leaves grew louder, then stopped. I waited, staring into the dark, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. Finally, it moved off again, fading slowly until I couldn't tell if I was imagining it. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay much longer. I was supposed to be out here for a week, but I knew I wouldn't last. The heat, the bugs, and now something I couldn't explain tracking me. It was too much. I packed slowly, listening, checking the mud again. The new prints were closer to the tent than before. I started back along the same path I came in. Moving felt harder, every noise sharper. The weight of the pack dragged me down, sweat blinding me. I stopped often to drink water, forcing myself to eat even when I wasn't hungry. By midday, I heard the sound again, behind me this time. I turned, gripping the machete, but saw nothing. Just the green wall of trees, endless and still. I kept walking faster now. The sound followed me for hours, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Not constant, but always there, reminding me I wasn't alone. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a jaguar or tapir, just curious. But the way it seemed to keep pace with me, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved, made my chest tighten. As the light began to fade, I knew I wouldn't make it out before nightfall. I found another patch of ground and forced myself to set up the tent quickly, hands shaking, eyes darting at every noise. I didn't cook. I didn't want the smell to spread. I just drank water and laid flat inside, gripping the machete, sweat soaking my back. That night was worse than all the others. The sound came again, closer than ever, circling the camp. I heard branches snap, leaves crunch, heavy steps pacing. My breathing was shallow, and I tried not to move. Hours dragged on like that, the thing outside waiting, circling, testing. At one point, I thought I heard it touch the tent fabric, the faintest brush of pressure. My whole body stiffened until I thought I would break. When morning finally came, I unzipped the tent slowly, afraid of what I would see. The ground was covered in fresh tracks. They were huge, clear, pressed deep into the mud. I didn't measure, but each one looked nearly the size of my chest. I didn't need to know what animal it was. I just knew I had to leave. I didn't stop moving that day. I pushed through brush until my legs gave out, then forced them forward again. My hands were cut from vines, my skin raw from sweat and bites, but I didn't care. The sound followed for hours, closer at times, then farther, but always there. By late afternoon, I finally saw a sign of people. A plastic bottle caught in the mud, then a faint trail, then the riverbank where I had first been dropped off. I stumbled out of the trees, my body shaking, my mouth dry. I dropped my pack and sat on the ground, staring at the water. For the first time in days, the sound was gone. Whatever it was had stayed in the trees, letting me go. I don't know if it was a jaguar, a tapir, or something else. I'll never know. What I do know is that the jungle had watched me the entire time, waiting. It had reminded me in every step, every breath, that I didn't belong there. I never went back. I still remember the hunting trip I took in the fall of 2006. I was 24 at the time, and I had saved up some money to take a trip out to the northern woods of Wisconsin. It wasn't my first time hunting, but it was the first time I had gone completely alone. I wanted a weekend of quiet, just me, my rifle, and the woods. The drive up from Milwaukee took nearly 6 hours. By the time I reached the trail that led into the forest, the sun was dipping low, spilling an orange glow over the tops of the trees. The air smelled like pine and cold earth. I parked my old Ford on a gravel pull-off, slung my backpack and rifle over my shoulders, and started walking down the trail. The plan was simple. Hike in about 3 miles, set up camp, hunt during the day, and return by Sunday afternoon. The ground was damp, the soil soft from rain the night before. Fallen leaves stuck to my boots as I trudged deeper into the trees. After about an hour, I found a small clearing near a stream, enough flat space to pitch my tent. I set down my pack, built a fire pit out of rocks, and worked quickly as the light drained away. By the time I had the tent up and a small fire going, the woods had gone dark except for the flames. The night was quiet, except for the distant rush of water and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. I cooked a can of chili over the fire, ate in silence, and lay back against my rolled-up jacket. The stars were sharp through the branches, and for a while, I felt calm. The cold crept in around midnight, and I finally crawled into my sleeping bag. I woke at dawn to the sound of birds and the crisp smell of morning frost. The fire had gone cold, so I broke it apart, ate a quick breakfast of granola, and headed out with my rifle. The woods were thick, tall pines mixed with bare oaks. I moved slow, scanning the ground for tracks. After 2 hours, I spotted deer prints in the mud near the stream. I followed them deeper, stepping carefully to keep quiet. Around mid-morning, I saw movement through the trees, just the white flick of a tail. I raised my rifle, steadied my breath, and waited. The deer stepped into view, a decent-sized buck. I fired once, and the shot cracked through the forest. The deer stumbled, ran a short distance, then collapsed. I slung the rifle and walked over, my heart pounding from the adrenaline. It was a clean shot. I dressed the deer right there, the smell of blood sharp in the cool air. I knew I'd have to drag it back to camp and hang it up to keep it safe from scavengers. The work took longer than I thought, and by the time I got the deer tied to a tree near my camp, the afternoon was fading. That evening, I cooked a small portion of meat over the fire. The rest I planned to deal with in the morning. I sat close to the flames, warming my hands. The quiet felt heavier than the night before. Every little sound in the woods made me stop chewing and listen. At one point, I thought I heard twigs snapping on the far edge of the clearing, but when I shined my flashlight in that direction, all I saw was a line of black trunks and shadows. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just animals smelling the carcass. Still, I stoked the fire higher than usual and sat with my rifle resting against my leg. I didn't crawl into the tent until after midnight, when the fire had burned down to glowing coals. The sound woke me. It wasn't loud, but sharp enough to cut through my sleep. Something moving outside the tent, just a few feet away. My first thought was a bear. I sat frozen in my bag, holding my breath. Then I heard the slow crunch of footsteps circling. They were steady, deliberate, too controlled to be an animal. I reached for my rifle, careful not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped right at the front of my tent. My pulse hammered in my ears. Whoever or whatever was there didn't speak, didn't move. They just stood there. I stayed as still as I could, gripping the rifle, listening. After what felt like an hour but was probably just a minute, the sound of footsteps drifted away into the trees. I didn't sleep again. I sat up in the dark, staring at the fabric of the tent, my hands tight on the rifle. When dawn came, I crawled out slowly. The clearing looked empty, but something wasn't right. The deer carcass I had hung in the tree was gone. The rope still dangled, cut clean, not chewed through, cut with something sharp. That hit me hard. A bear would have torn it down, dragged it, left pieces. But this was clean, deliberate. Someone had walked into my camp in the middle of the night and taken it. My chest felt tight as I looked around the clearing. No tracks stood out clearly on the cold ground, but I knew what had happened. I decided then I wasn't staying another night. I packed fast, tearing down the tent, stuffing everything back into my bag. The fire pit was still black with ash when I slung the rifle and started back toward the trail. I moved quick, but every step felt watched. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my own boots. About halfway back, I stopped to rest near a fallen log. That's when I noticed it. On the ground beside the trail, pressed into the mud, was a boot print. It wasn't mine. The tread was different, smaller, fresh, pointed in the same direction I was heading. Whoever had been in my camp wasn't just out there randomly. They were moving along the same trail I had come in on. I tightened my grip on the rifle and kept moving. My legs ached, but I didn't stop again until I saw the glint of my truck through the trees. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. On the hood of the truck, scratched into the dirt of the paint, was a line. Just one deep line, dragged from one side to the other, like someone had taken a knife and carved across it. I threw my pack into the bed, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The woods were still and silent, the trail behind me empty. I started the engine, the sound too loud, bouncing through the trees. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I didn't look back again. I drove straight through until I hit the highway, the woods fading in the rear view. I didn't stop until I was back home, the sun already gone. I parked in front of my apartment and sat there in the dark cab for a long time. To this day, I don't know who was out there. All I know is that someone followed me, cut down my deer, and walked through my camp in the middle of the night. I never went back to those woods again. Every time I think about it, I picture that clean-cut rope swinging in the dawn light and the boot print pointing the same way I was walking. That hunting trip taught me something I've never forgotten. The woods aren't always empty, and sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't the animals. It's the people you don't see. I was 26 years old in the summer of 2014 when I decided to take a short trip out to the countryside on my own. I had been working in the city for years and felt burned out. A friend of mine had distant relatives in Illinois who owned a large piece of farmland, and through him I got permission to camp there for a few days. It wasn't a commercial campground, just private property with old barns, empty fields, and rows of corn stretching as far as I could see. That was exactly what I wanted: quiet, open space, no neighbors close by. I drove out one hot Friday afternoon, the sun beating down on the hood of my old Ford, the air heavy and sticky with late July heat. By the time I reached the farm, the fields shimmered like they were made of glass. The place looked frozen in time. Leaning barns with rusted tin roofs, a windmill that creaked every time the breeze shifted, and long gravel paths overgrown with weeds. I parked near one of the barns, grabbed my pack, and walked about a quarter mile toward the back of the property where a wide clearing sat between the cornfields and a small pond. That's where I set up my tent. By dusk, the cicadas had taken over the soundscape. Their sharp, buzzing rhythm filled every inch of the air. I cooked a small meal on my portable stove, just canned beans and bread, and sat watching the sun sink behind the corn. Everything smelled of dirt, dry stalks, and pond algae. It felt different from the city. Every movement carried, every rustle seemed louder. By the time I crawled into my tent, the sky was a bowl of stars and the air had cooled. I thought I'd sleep easy, but I didn't. Somewhere deep into the night, I woke up with my skin prickling. First, I thought it was just the chill. Then I realized what had woken me. The sound of steps in the dirt, heavy and uneven, coming from somewhere near the barn I had passed earlier. I told myself it was probably a cow or maybe a deer straying close. But the steps didn't sound like hooves. They sounded like boots dragging a little between each crunch of gravel. I lay still inside my sleeping bag, listening. The steps paused, then started again, slower now, as if whoever it was had stopped to look around. The barn was far enough from my tent that I couldn't see it in the dark, but close enough that every sound carried cleanly. My heart beat harder than I wanted to admit. I stayed quiet, waiting for the steps to fade. After several long minutes, they did. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it had been a farmhand checking on equipment, though I hadn't been told anyone lived or worked on the property full-time. Still, daylight makes everything less threatening. I brewed instant coffee, took a walk around the pond, and even went exploring near the barn. The doors were chained, the wood splintered and gray. No fresh tracks in the dirt, nothing out of place. By afternoon, the heat was brutal. I spent most of the day reading in the shade, then cooked a simple meal again. When darkness fell, I felt tense but tried to ignore it. I zipped up the tent, laid down, and forced myself to sleep. It didn't last long. Around midnight, I woke again. This time it wasn't just steps. It was the distinct sound of something brushing through the corn. The stalks made a dry, rattling sound as they bent and snapped back. It moved slow, like someone weaving carefully, not an animal running. I held my breath, straining to tell the direction. It circled, always staying within the rows but never entering the clearing. The sound went on for what felt like half an hour. Eventually it stopped, but the silence that followed felt even worse, like the air was waiting. I didn't sleep after that. At the first hint of dawn, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The clearing looked normal, but I noticed faint impressions near the edge of the corn, not deep enough to be boot prints, but too organized to be random. It looked like someone had been standing there for a long time, shifting their weight. The second day dragged on heavy with dread. I kept telling myself to pack up and leave, but pride or stubbornness kept me there. I told myself one more night, then I'd head back early in the morning. That evening I built a small fire, even though I hadn't planned on it. The flames gave me comfort. I sat close, staring at the orange glow, pretending it was just another camping trip. When I finally went to bed, I kept a flashlight and my pocket knife within reach. The noises came earlier this time. Not even 2 hours after lying down, I heard the crunch of gravel again. This time closer, moving along the path toward the pond. I froze, my hand tight around the flashlight. The steps slowed as they neared the clearing. I could hear the shift of weight, the scuff of something dragging. Then silence. I waited, barely breathing. Suddenly, the zipper of my tent rattled. I bolted upright, snapping the flashlight on, but the beam only lit the fabric from the inside. Whoever or whatever had touched it had already stepped back. I could hear retreating steps, faster now, fading toward the barn. My throat went dry. I stayed awake until morning, shaking. At sunrise, I made my decision. I packed everything fast, shoving gear into the bag without caring if it fit right. As I loaded the car, I scanned the property, half expecting to see someone watching from the corn or the barn. Nothing moved, but when I opened the driver's side door, I saw it, muddy fingerprints smeared on the handle. Long, clear streaks, left there overnight while I slept. That was enough. I drove away without looking back, the gravel spitting under my tires. My heart only slowed once I hit the highway and the fields gave way to gas stations and traffic. I never reported it. I don't even know what I would have said. Trespassing? Some drifter wandering the farm? Maybe. All I know is that someone was out there those nights, circling the tent, standing in the corn, trying the zipper. It's been years since then, but even now I can't sleep in total silence. I need the sound of traffic, of neighbors, of people near. Whenever I think about that farm, the image that comes back isn't the cornfields or the pond or the barn. It's the shape of those fingerprints on the car handle. Proof that I hadn't imagined a thing. I had been traveling through Europe during the summer of 2016. I was 26 at the time, restless, and carrying a backpack that I thought made me look more adventurous than I actually was. I wanted to save money, so I decided to camp whenever I could instead of paying for hostels. Most of the time it was fine. Quiet spots on the edge of small towns, campgrounds near rivers, or tucked away in fields where no one bothered me. One particular night, I ended up in the south of France, not far from the Dordogne Valley. The sun had been hot all day, and by evening I was exhausted from walking. I followed a small dirt path off the main road, past a stretch of farmland, until I found a clearing lined with trees. It seemed quiet enough. I could hear crickets in the grass, and the faint sound of water trickling somewhere close. I pitched my small tent under an oak tree, laid out my sleeping bag, and boiled some instant noodles on a little camping stove. By the time the sky turned dark, I was already lying inside the tent, sweating a little from the warmth still lingering in the ground. I scrolled through old photos on my phone until the battery died, then put it aside. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the occasional croak of frogs or the sound of wind moving through leaves. It must have been close to midnight when I heard the first noise. At first it was faint, like footsteps dragging through grass. I froze, listening. I thought it might have been an animal, maybe a fox or even a wild boar, since the area was rural. I held still, waiting. The sound paused, then continued, slow and steady. Definitely footsteps, not the fast scurry of an animal. I pulled myself up and pressed my ear against the thin fabric of the tent. My heart thudded against my chest. Whoever it was, they weren't moving fast. It was almost like they were circling, their shoes brushing against the dry ground every few seconds. I tried to tell myself it could just be another traveler or a farmer checking his land. Still, the thought of unzipping the tent and finding someone standing there made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped. For a few minutes, I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then suddenly, there was a sharp crack of a branch snapping. It sounded too close, only a few meters away. I sat frozen in the dark, staring at the thin shape of the tent walls, half expecting a shadow to appear against them. Nothing did. I clenched my pocket knife in my hand, though I knew it was small and wouldn't help much. Minutes passed, and I convinced myself it was nothing. I lay back down, though my body stayed tense. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was probably just a random hiker heading home late. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted in and out of shallow sleep. Sometime later, maybe an hour, maybe less, I woke up again. This time, I didn't hear footsteps. Instead, I felt something different. The air inside the tent was warmer, heavier, as if someone had been standing too close. My ears picked up the faintest sound, like breathing, slow and steady, just outside the thin nylon wall. I didn't move. I lay stiff, trying to control my own breath, afraid to make noise. The sound of that breathing continued for what felt like forever, hovering at one spot. My skin prickled with sweat. Finally, after what could have been minutes or seconds, it stopped. Then came the sound of footsteps again, this time walking away, fading into the dark. I couldn't sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the tent zipper being pulled open, a face leaning in. I waited for the first sign of dawn, when the sky finally began to pale. As soon as there was enough light to see, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The clearing was empty. The grass was wet with dew, and everything looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. I checked around the area, half expecting to find nothing. But near the edge of the clearing, not far from my tent, I noticed something in the dirt. Shoe prints. They were larger than mine, deeper, and clear enough that I knew it hadn't been my imagination. Someone had stood there, only feet from where I slept. I hurried to pack up my things, stuffing the tent and sleeping bag into my backpack with shaky hands. I wanted to get back to the road as fast as I could. As I was rolling up my mat, I noticed something else. On the tree nearest my tent, there was a mark, a long, thin scrape in the bark, as though someone had dragged a knife or sharp object down its surface. It wasn't old. The wood underneath looked fresh and pale. That chilled me more than the footsteps had. It meant whoever was out there had stood in the dark, right by me, and made that mark while I was inside the tent pretending to sleep. I couldn't stop picturing it. Someone running a blade slowly down the tree trunk while listening to me breathe only a few feet away. I shoved the last of my gear into my bag and got moving. The road wasn't far, but every sound made me jump. A crow flying out of a tree, a dog barking in the distance. Everything felt like it was following me. When I finally stepped onto the main road and saw a car drive past, I felt a kind of relief I hadn't felt in years. I didn't camp alone for a while after that. Even now, thinking about it years later, the memory makes my stomach turn. There hadn't been a ghost, no strange legend, no fairy tale twist. It was just a man who found my tent in the woods and decided to stand outside it in the dark, breathing, marking the tree. I'll never know why he was there or what he wanted, but I do know that if I hadn't woken up when I did, or if I had unzipped that tent out of curiosity, things could have ended a lot differently. That was the last night I ever camped in a random clearing. From then on, I only stayed in proper campgrounds with other people around. I learned that the real danger isn't in the stories we tell about haunted forests. It's in the living people who decide to walk into them at night. I had always loved the outdoors, but the trip I took in the summer of 2011 still hangs in my mind like a scar. I was 28 at the time, living in Ohio, and I decided to take a week off work to drive south into Tennessee for a solo camping trip. I wanted quiet, a place far from people, somewhere to breathe. I packed my old Chevy with my tent, cooler, rifle, and a duffel of clothes. My plan was simple: camp out for 4 nights in a secluded state forest I'd read about, hunt a little, hike, and just clear my head. The forest was thick, with rolling hills, streams cutting through valleys, and long gravel roads that seemed endless. By the time I turned off the main highway, it felt like I had driven into another world. The road narrowed to dirt, and every mile deeper into the woods made the air feel heavier. It was mid-July, humid, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin. My shirt clung to my back before I had even pitched my tent. I found a clearing a good mile off the main road, not an official campsite, just a flat patch of ground near a small creek. No one would bother me there. I set up my tent, a simple 2-man canvas thing I'd had since college. I built a fire ring from rocks, stacked wood, and got my camp in order. I remember how quiet it was, the kind of quiet where every little snap of a twig makes your head turn. That first night was uneventful. I ate a can of chili, listened to crickets, and laid on my back staring at the stars. Out there, the sky looked endless, sharp with constellations I couldn't see from home. I felt good, like I'd made the right choice. But the second day started to change that. I went for a long hike, following the creek deeper into the woods. After maybe 2 hours, I noticed footprints in the mud. Not fresh, but not old either. Big boot prints, headed in the same direction I was walking. They weren't mine. I paused longer than I probably should have, just staring at them. I told myself hunters or hikers must have been through here, but it unsettled me more than I admitted at the time. On the way back that evening, I heard movement in the trees behind me. Every time I stopped, the noise stopped. It wasn't a deer, too heavy. I turned around once, catching what I swore was a figure slipping behind a tree, but I convinced myself it was just my nerves. By the time I reached camp, the sweat on my back wasn't just from the heat. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of water splashing at the creek. Something was moving down there. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and peeked out. The moonlight was bright enough to see the outline of someone crouched at the water, maybe 50 yards away. I froze, not even breathing. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He wasn't doing anything but crouching there, running his hands through the water. I stayed still for a long time, watching him. Finally, he stood and walked back into the trees without ever looking in my direction. I didn't sleep at all after that. By morning, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just another camper or someone fishing. But what gnawed at me was how quiet he'd been. No flashlight, no gear, no sound of boots on rocks. Nothing. Just there, then gone. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I didn't. Pride, maybe, or stupidity. The third day dragged on, heavy with unease. Every sound in the woods felt sharper. Around noon, I noticed something wrong near my camp. My cooler had been moved. Not opened, not taken, just shifted about a foot like someone had nudged it with their boot. The hairs on my neck stood up. That night, I decided to keep the fire going longer than usual, hoping the light would deter whoever might be creeping around. I sat up with my rifle across my lap, listening, waiting. Around 2 in the morning, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps circling just beyond the firelight, crunching leaves, snapping twigs, always staying just far enough away that I couldn't see. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Whoever it was never came closer, just circled and circled until finally it stopped. I sat there until dawn, hands shaking on the rifle, eyes burning from exhaustion. By then, leaving wasn't just an idea, it was survival. I packed everything in a rush, barely folding the tent, shoving gear into the Chevy. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just wanted to get out. But the forest didn't make it easy. The dirt road out seemed longer than when I came in, every bend making me think someone was waiting around the corner. I drove fast, too fast for those narrow tracks, but I couldn't slow down. My rearview mirror felt like it was pulling my eyes every other second. At one point, I swear I saw a man standing at the tree line as I rounded a curve, watching. When I finally hit the main highway, I pulled over at a gas station, shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I sat there for half an hour, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself I was fine. I never reported it. What would I even say? Some guy walked near my tent and moved my cooler? No one would care. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I know it wasn't nothing. That man out there wasn't just passing through. He was watching me, studying me, waiting for something. Even now, years later, when I think about camping, I feel that same knot in my chest. I haven't gone alone since. I don't care how peaceful the woods look, how open the sky feels at night. There's nothing peaceful about being hunted by someone who doesn't want to be seen. And in that forest, I know for certain I was never alone. I still remember that trip like it happened yesterday. It was the summer of 2014, and I was 26 at the time. I had taken a week off work to do something different, something away from noise and routine. I packed up my old camping gear, loaded the back of my 2001 Jeep Cherokee, and drove out toward northern Michigan, far from towns and houses. I wanted quiet. I wanted to sit by a fire with only the sound of crickets and the woods around me. I had camped plenty of times before, but mostly at public campgrounds. This time, I wanted something more remote. I had looked over a map, found an old Forest Service road that cut into the state forest, and planned to set up a few miles in. The road was rough, filled with potholes and patches of mud, but the Jeep made it through fine. I pulled off onto a small clearing that looked like it hadn't been used in years. There were no picnic tables, no fire pits, just grass and uneven dirt. It was exactly what I wanted. By late afternoon, I had my tent pitched, my folding chair out, and a small fire burning. I cooked a simple meal, some sausages and bread I had wrapped in foil. After eating, I leaned back in my chair and just listened. The woods stretched out in all directions, thick with pine and oak. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I could hear nothing but birds and the occasional rustle of wind. For a while, I felt completely at peace. As the sun started dipping low, I noticed how quickly the forest darkened. The shadows stretched long and the tree line turned black against the orange sky. By the time the sun disappeared, the woods were completely different. The cheerful sound of birds gave way to the sharper cries of night insects and the occasional snap of branches somewhere deeper in the trees. I knew it was just raccoons or deer, but being alone out there, every sound made me more alert. I added more wood to the fire, making sure it burned strong. I didn't bring a gun, only a decent hunting knife and a small hatchet, but I figured that was enough. After a while, I crawled into my tent, zipped the flap, and laid down in my sleeping bag. The night was quiet except for the crackling fire outside and the wind moving through the trees. I drifted in and out of sleep, half listening to the sounds outside. It was close to midnight when I woke up again. First, I thought it was just the fire dying down that caught my attention. But then I heard something else. Footsteps. They weren't quick, they weren't loud, but they were steady, crunching on the dried leaves and sticks, moving around the clearing. My first thought was a deer, but the steps didn't sound like that. They were too deliberate, too slow, like someone was walking carefully. I held my breath inside the tent. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it would shake the whole tent. The footsteps circled around for a while, and then everything went quiet again. I lay there frozen, clutching the knife inside my sleeping bag. My mind ran through every possibility. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe some hunter who didn't realize I was here, or maybe just my imagination making something out of nothing. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually I forced myself to unzip the tent a little and peek out. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, casting just enough light to see the clearing. Nothing moved. The woods were dark and still. I didn't see anyone. After a while, I convinced myself it must have been an animal and crawled back into my bag, though I couldn't get much sleep after that. At first light, I got up and stepped out of the tent. The air was cold and damp, with a layer of fog hugging the ground. I walked around the clearing just to check. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Human footprints, clear as day in the soft dirt near the edge of the clearing. They weren't mine. I hadn't walked there the day before. They circled the clearing once, close to the trees, then vanished back into the woods. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I tried to brush it off. Maybe some hiker had stumbled across my camp in the night, got spooked by the fire, and left. But the way the prints circled, it didn't look like someone passing through. It looked like someone watching. I kept busy that morning, cooking breakfast, gathering more firewood, anything to take my mind off it. By midday, I thought about packing up and leaving, but stubbornness kept me there. I had driven all the way out, and I told myself I wasn't going to let a set of footprints ruin it. That day passed without much happening. I fished in a nearby stream, walked a few trails, and tried to enjoy the quiet. But as evening crept in again, I couldn't shake the unease. I made sure to build a bigger fire this time, stacking enough wood to last through the night. I sat with my back against the Jeep, watching the tree line, listening for anything unusual. Around midnight again, the sounds started. Not just footsteps this time, but the distinct crack of branches under weight, the shuffle of something moving between the trees. I strained my eyes but couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. My hands were sweaty on the handle of the knife. The noises moved around me, circling again. Sometimes close, sometimes farther back, always just out of sight. Then came the smell. Cigarette smoke. Faint, but clear in the cold night air. My stomach dropped. No animal smelled like that. Someone was out there, close, watching me, smoking, moving slowly around my camp. I stayed awake the rest of that night, every muscle tense, staring at the dark. By morning, I was drained. I didn't even bother cooking breakfast. I started breaking down camp right away, stuffing gear back into the Jeep as fast as I could. I kept looking up, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the clearing. But the woods stayed empty. The drive back down the forest road felt endless. Every time the Jeep bounced in a rut or slowed in the mud, I imagined someone stepping out of the trees. But no one did. Eventually, I reached the main road and the small highway back toward town. Only then did I feel like I could breathe again. I never found out who was out there or why they circled my camp at night. I don't know if it was just some local messing with me or something worse. What I do know is that it wasn't an animal. I saw the footprints, I smelled the smoke, I heard the slow, deliberate steps. That was the last time I camped alone, far out in the woods. These days, if I go camping, it's at a public site with other people around. Some folks say being alone in the forest is peaceful, but once you've had someone you can't see circling your tent in the dark, you stop thinking of the woods as quiet and safe. For me, that night changed the way I look at camping forever.